on this beautiful Thursday afternoon. We do have John Barclay here with us. We're excited to have him. He's coming to us from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I know they're not quite a sunny day there, experiencing some weather, but we're thrilled to have John, an award-winning photographer, here to tell you all about how to use Perfectly Clear to optimize your raw files. Now we have John on the line. I want to thank you all for joining us. Feel free to write in any questions that you might see, and we'll also listen up. And if you can hear us, make sure that you can write anything in. Any technical difficulties we'll be happy to solve. Thanks again, and I'll pass it right along to John Barclay.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Let's just do a double check here. You can see my screen on your end over there, Matt? And then
got it, John.
I assume everybody can hear me. Perfect, great. I just like to double check, make sure that everybody can see me and hear me. That usually is very helpful. Yes, he mentioned that we're having weather, just a heads up, folks. We're in severe thunderstorms here in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. You'll probably hear it because the house has been rumbling and shaking. I know I have local friends who are going to be joining the webinar tonight. They're probably right in the middle of it too. I do have a whole house generator that may help here if we lose power. I'm not sure I'll keep my internet that way, so we'll get as far as we can along in this. I hope you'll be patient with some of the grumbling that's going on in the background. Exciting times here. Okay, as I like to do in other webinars that I have done, I like to talk a little bit about philosophy first so that you understand where I'm coming from and what I'm trying to accomplish in a webinar. We're not necessarily trying to accomplish, although Perfectly Clear is a little different because you can get great pictures really quickly. That's the whole idea. But in general, I'm not necessarily looking to make, finished perfect pictures in a webinar. I'm trying to share concepts and ideas that hopefully will be helpful for you to be able to employ into your workflow. So I'll share how I'm finding a product to be beneficial in hopes that there might be some inspiration for you to do so as well. So let's take just a minute and talk about what makes Perfectly Clear unique and different and why we might choose to use it over something else or along with something else. And I think that last comment is probably more important. I think people think that it needs to be the only thing, and that's not true at all. It should be a starting place. So what is Perfectly Clear? It's a one-click correction and optimization of your file. So it's doing 20 different corrections with one click. And really what it's trying to do is overcome, and this is really important, I don't think it gets emphasized enough, it's trying to overcome the limitations of your sensor. And it's trying to overcome the limitations of technology. And what does that mean? Well, have you ever noticed when you get a file and you're shooting in what we might call optimal light, or some people call it cherry light, or some people call it, golden light, whatever you want to call it, you'll notice that when you bring those files into RAW, you need to do pretty much nothing to them. That's because you're using the best quality of light, and that sensor, most sensors can handle that really well. It's when you get outside of that that you're having light that's a little more difficult to manage, and thus if we look at my screen here and look at any of these top, well, there's 3 images. The reason there's 2 here is I've already gone ahead and loaded the Palouse image into Perfectly Clear so that we can save a little bit of time, but they look really flat and dull. Limitation of sensor, limitation of camera technology. That's why. So Perfectly Clear's engine, which by the way is a separate engine with patented technology, specifically works outside of Lightroom or outside of Adobe Camera Raw, it's doing its own thing, is attempting and doing a really good job of overcoming those limitations of the sensor. So the better the light, the less it does. The more challenging the light that we're shooting in, the more corrections that you'll see Perfectly Clear do. But the real key here is what we're trying to do is overcome the limitations and do things quickly. And so you should see Perfectly Clear as a real time saver as well, and I think we'll show that very clearly. Now, depending on the type of business you're in, you might see that time savings more than others, and I think I have a good series to show you where it would be beneficial in the type of photography I do. If you're doing portrait shooting and so forth, it's a huge time saver because you have many images in similar light, whereas landscape photographers you might not be batching as much, but I think when you understand the batch capability that we'll cover here, hopefully you'll get an understanding. Last thing is, it does work in Lightroom, it does work in Photoshop, it does work in Elements. So all of those platforms are supported for those who might not have the product yet. Okay, so as I say, I've gone ahead and loaded this Palouse image so that we can start to understand the interface. Let me just go pop into Perfectly Clear. And so here's the Perfectly Clear interface. I have it set, there's different views that you can have here side by side without any correction shown, and then where you can pull it so that you can see what's happening. To me, there's no better image than this one to start with, because this is the one when Brad and I first spoke about Perfectly Clear and its value and benefits. You talk about a one-click correction. So here I thought we had a beautiful day out in the Palouse, yet when I get my raw files back, this is exactly what it looks like. It's just flat and dull. It doesn't look anything like what my eyes saw. And by bringing it into, and I'm just going to go right to the full view here, with one click on the preset called Detail, that's what it looks like. Or Vivid looks like that. Landscape, I tend not to use, even though I do a lot of landscape. I tend to live in the details in the Vivid and or create my own presets, which I can apply here, and we'll talk about that in a second. So before we go a whole lot further, because I don't know the level of knowledge of the attendees here, I'm going to err on the side of going through and being really clear about what's going on, because I think it will be very beneficial, even if you're a user of some time here, because there are some adjustments that you need to understand about. Okay, so top right, if we click on presets, we get exactly that. Then if we hit the adjust, so if I hit detail and then I hit adjust, I can now go in here and make adjustments to these. Notice there's portrait and eyes that are also checked during this detail adjustment. That's the reason I went back here, made some adjustments, turned all these off, and then created by hitting this create my own preset. So thus I have a few different presets here. If we use John Sharp, that's a good preset, and you'll notice it's pretty much the detail presets, but I've gotten rid of portrait and eyes, which don't apply to much of my photography because I don't do portrait work per se. So let's kind of go through the sliders, because there's a few things that are important to know. So that adjustment, whether you pick, back to here, whether you pick details or Viv or whatever you say, is presetting these sliders to a certain location. That doesn't mean that you can't go and adjust those, and I would encourage you to do so and start to understand, like any piece of software, what they're doing. And what's going to be important here is you can hit the buttons and get you can get more adjustment to the exposure, or you can grab the slider and do more that way. Either way, right? Or turn it right off if you want to. I don't know why you'd ever want to turn exposure off. Usually I'm choosing to be on the low side, but I'll investigate the other ones. Here's where it gets a little more interesting. The depth slider, as you move it over, may or may not have an impact depending on the level of adjustment that's required in that particular image. Same with vibrancy. Vibrancy may or may not have an impact depending on the amount of adjustment that's necessary. Remember, what's happening is Perfectly Clear is working on a pixel level, so every pixel is being evaluated and adjusted, right? So that's why you can have certain parts of an image have more of an effect than other parts of the image. What's really important on the depth and the vibrance sliders is there are going to be times where it feels like there's too much vibrancy, and as much as I pull it all the way to where this number is 0, we really still haven't turned the vibrancy slider off. If I click the box now that says vibrancy, notice the big difference? Turn it back on. So on with the checkbox on vibrancy, set to 0, is still being adjusted. Clicking off the box truly turns it off. I think that's really important to know. In this image, I actually like it brought up a little bit more in vibrancy because it looks more like what I remember it's being. So depth can do the same thing on this particular image. We're not seeing as much of an impact, almost little to none, with the depth slider. There is some. You can see it if I turn it on and off, but when I turn the amount, it really doesn't do a whole lot. There's a little bit. It's going to be subtle on a screen that you're seeing here. Fidelity has to do with color tonality, and I want you to focus on this strong green. It's almost a lime green, and if you think about it, it's really not true color. Digital cameras still have somewhat of a challenge in overcoming certain colors and representing them correct, especially purples. You know, the classic one is to show a Los Angeles Lakers jersey, which is purple, and it'll show up more blue. If you hit the Fidelity tab and I had a Lakers jersey here, it would be purple. That's what it's doing. That's the best example I can think of. But let's watch this, and I'll turn Fidelity on, and you'll see that green change dramatically. Now, Fidelity has a choice of both vivid and or standard. That's purely subjective. You choose what you want. But in this case, to my eye, it is making that green area, especially here, much more natural looking and much more like what it should be for the Palouse region. So I don't know about you, but if I click on, and this is where I start, this is a raw file, and then I bring it in. Now, you know, yes, I've taken a fair amount of time here to explain a few of the key sliders so far, and we'll cover the others and we'll review, because that's what I tend to do to cement some ideas here. I think that's an amazing adjustment. Now, some people might be saying, but can I just do that in, you know, raw processing in Lightroom or in Adobe Camera Raw? Well, in this case, and maybe that's what I should have done tonight, but I don't want to take that time, but I would encourage you to do this yourself. In this case, quite candidly, I struggled to get these files to look like what I wanted to. They were my favorite images last year, and I couldn't wait to process them, and I just couldn't get them to look crisp and have a real dynamic pop to them. And then I tried Perfectly Clear, one click and a couple of sliders, and I got this look, and I was sold. That was what did it for me and really helped me understand the value. I should go back a little bit. It's important to know that the best way to use Perfectly Clear is on an unedited raw file. So you certainly can adjust your white balance to get the white balance proper, because I would rather you do that on the raw file, but everything else, all the other sliders, you really don't need to touch. Doesn't mean you can't. You can. But it seems to work better on an unedited raw file, and that's its objective of how it should be used as well. So I'm sure there's questions. We'll do some questions at the end, and there might be questions about, because I didn't cover something thoroughly, but if I just ask you to bear with me here, hopefully as we do a couple more examples, we'll answer those questions along the way here. Maybe one more that we'll cover now. Sharpening was a question for me. I was curious as to what was really happening, so I had a conversation with the folks at Athentech to really understand it. This sharpening should be viewed as camera sharpening, so like the sharpening that's happening in Lightroom. So my recommendation would be not to duplicate this. My recommendation would be to go ahead and use the sharpening and the sharpening that's being recommended in the process here, in the 20 corrections that are happening, and I think you'll find that it does a better job in that camera sharpening. It's not output sharpening. That's what I've determined here in the conversations with Athentech. It's overcoming, again, the limitations of sensor sharpening, and then you can do your processing later, or when you size for print or output or whatever you're doing, then you can certainly look at your normal sharpening workflow then for the proper output. So let's, rather than go on, I'll go ahead and you would just simply hit save. And on the next one, we'll kind of see the process here from beginning to end. So let's go down to Burano, Italy, where I just was with a group. And let's do this one next. From Lightroom, getting into Perfectly Clear is as simple as right-clicking, editing, Perfectly Clear. You can hit the word photo, go to edit, go to Perfectly Clear. You know, whatever the normal way you access your plugins should be the way that you access the plugin here. It's going to take a little bit of time to come up. This is always when we should have background music playing, right? Okay, should be close. Sometime today would be good. Again, takes my breath away. Before, after. In these situations I'm showing you, pretty much done. So let's add another concept to the discussion here. Here's the way I would encourage you to view Perfectly Clear. Yes, there are situations like the Palouse image and like this image where, quite candidly, I'm done. However, there are situations, and we'll show one, where you know, the quality of the file is good enough that I do my processing in Lightroom and I feel like I'm done. But then I'll throw it at Perfectly Clear when I'm in Photoshop, and I'll go, oh, shoot, that actually was kind of flat looking. I'm glad I applied Perfectly Clear in Photoshop as a last step. That's another option. But think of Perfectly Clear not necessarily as being a be-all, one-all. It's not a one-shop and you're done, or one-stop and you're done. Or one click. I knew I'd be able to get there. One click and you're done. It can be like this Burano picture, but oftentimes what I'm doing is I'm letting it overcome the limitations of my sensor and optimizing that file. And then I'm working on that optimized file in Lightroom and finishing up. I might be setting a better black point. I might be setting a stronger white point. I might be adding contrast, whatever, opening up shadows on that properly adjusted file that Perfectly Clear is doing. So it's not like a one-click adjustment in other pieces of software. That's what I'm trying to drill home here. It's very different than that. It is trying to present you with, and doing a great job of presenting you with, a high-quality file that you can now do all of your creative processing on, or effect processing on if you want to. Okay, so let's go back here. How would we normally work with the program? Well, you might look at what Details does, you might look at what Vivid does, and then you might go in and look at the presets that you've done. And then you might make some adjustments here and say, well, what's happening with the exposure if I go to medium, if I go to high, low? I think I like it at low. How does depth get affected? Not a whole lot going on depth in this one. Again, pull that slider. Yeah, that I like what it did to the windows. I made it a lot blacker in the windows, set a nice depth there. Vibrancy, do I want to add more vibrancy? Again, that's all subjective. I like what they chose. Remember, if we turn it off just by way of review, it's not the same thing as pulling this to 0. So turning vibrancy on, pulling it to 0 is not off. Clicking the checkbox is off. And there are times when you're going to want to turn that off. And again, remember, sharpening has to do with camera or sharpening, not output sharpening. So if that's what you like, and you know you're going to do a batch, which we're going to do next, you would just simply come down here to Create. You would call that something, you know, Burano, abstracts, whatever you want to call it, and save that. I've already done that and created a preset called Burano. Okay, so once we have that done, let's go ahead and hit a save here. Hey, everybody's staying with me. I appreciate that. I can see how many people are in attendance, and it's nice that number doesn't change. So it means you're not asleep yet. That's good. Okay, so let's go to Perfectly Clear Batch. And what I have here, okay, what I'm hoping I have, there they are, is a number of images that I shot. My gosh, I don't know about you folks, but when you get into these kind of reflections and you have the colorful houses like you do in Burano, oh my gosh, I mean, I think I took 400 pictures. Well, so when I got them into Camera Raw, this is what I saw, a whole bunch of flat images. You talk about bummer. I mean, it was just disappointing to see all these flat images. So what am I going to do? Go through every single one of these and make adjustments? No, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could just do a batch adjustment and make them look as great as that one we just did? Yes. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to grab all of these Burano images. I'm just going to shift click those. Obviously, you would shift click on your whole batch. You would make a collection, however you want to do it. You would do a selection and then grab all somehow, right click, go to export, and bring up this file. Now, normally it would say whatever, hard drive or something else up there. So let's go ahead and put it there so we can walk through this box. I'm just going to come down here to Athentech Perfectly Clear 2. And then there's going to be user presets. Normally it might say system presets. You want to go to user presets. And in user presets, it's going to show you those presets that I've created in Perfectly Clear. Remember, we created, or I had previously created, Burano. So now it's simply saying, where do I want to put those? Well, for ease sake on this one, I'm going to put them in the same folder, the Italy folder that I had my raw files in. I am going to want to create a subfolder, so I click that, and I'm going to call that subfolder underneath my original folder, Perfectly Clear versions. And then so that you and I will be able to see them and understand what's been done and see how great they are, we're going to add them to the catalog. This ask what to do is self-explanatory. File renaming, just for sake, I'm just going to go ahead and pick custom name and original file number. That's from this drop-down list, right? And then that custom text I'm going to have is it's going to be called Burano PC for Perfectly Clear. And then just so that we speed things along, I'm going to make them JPEGs, sRGB. You can make any choices you want, right? You can make these TIFFs. Obviously, you may want to do that if you're going to use those and don't want to do a lot more work. I just got to take a minute and I'll let you guys know I'm glancing out my window and it's just horrifically awesome looking out there. It's really, really brooding dark and I almost want to go out with the camera, but obviously I've got you guys here. Okay, so back to this. So we have settings, we got JPEG for this situation, and I'm not going to make them big full-size JPEGs. I'm going to make them a resize to 2,000 pixels on the long side, 72 PPI. We don't, again, you can make them whatever you want to, add copyrights, all that stuff. Now, an important checkbox. Back up to the top here. See where it says hide perfectly clear window? If I hide that, it's going to do its work in the background and then finally tell you when it's done, and you don't have a chance to do any correction or further adjustments. So the reason you want to unclick this, and we'll do it this time just to show you why, where it happens. In this case, probably I would not. I would leave this checked as hide the one because I know each of these images are pretty much the same light, same subject matter. There's no need to make tweaks to them. But if you have a group of images from, let's say, a picnic that you were just at for 4th of July, and you took a lot of snapshots and you just want to do an easy, simple correction to those, and that's a great use for Perfectly Clear. There might be some varying light as you turn to various directions, and you might want the ability to make a subtle tweak. That's why you would turn this off. So it's going to take a while to do this. So we'll go ahead and get that working. I think it gave me that overwrite box only because I had done this as a test, as I tend to do when I'm preparing for a webinar to make sure things go okay. Normally you wouldn't get that box. It would just start to do its work in the background. So you can see it's doing the work. It's going along pretty quickly because it's just making JPEGs. At the end, what we're going to be presented with is that we should be here, if everything goes well, we should be presented with the Perfectly Clear interface again, and it's going to allow us to go through all of those, I forget how many I had here, 9 images I think it is, in this particular group, all of those images and be able to make another tweak on the fly. So it's going to apply that preset. Okay, there we are. Look at the bottom here now. It says 1 of 9, and then we can go, here's 2 of 9, 3 of 9, 4, right? And so, okay, we get to this one, we say, oh gosh, I wish I could have adjusted that to the medium on this, and you know what, I'd rather have more vibrancy. It allows you to do that to just that one, and then as I go to 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9, I can further make adjustments should I want to those individual images, okay? So, and it's obviously still applying that adjustment I just made, so just beware of that. You're going to have to adjust that. So it allows you to tweak those if you want to, and that's why you want to have those on. Otherwise, at the end of this batch, I'm going to hit Save All. And now it should have saved all those. Let's see if we can go find them. So if I go back up to, here's Tuscany, Venice. I'm on the left side of my Lightroom screen. And there was my raw file folder. Here's my perfectly clear versions. And there, if I've got to go across them to activate that. And you'll see that just that fast, huge time saver to make all of those look great. Now it's a whole lot easier for me to go through and pick my favorites from the Burano reflections. So batch processing speed so that we can be out making photographs rather than working on files is a big advantage of Perfectly Clear. Okay, let's go back here and then let me look at time. Okay, it's always going really fast. Dory, you can send a message. I know where Dory's on. Are you getting killed over there in Doylestown? Okay, let's see. Just one more kind of just to put a exclamation point, edit in Perfectly Clear. Takes a second to bring it on up, giving me a chance to get a little drink. Okay, should come up pretty quickly. I say I'm not a portrait photographer, but you do see I have a couple of pictures of people. I thought we would at least show you another one of the benefits and advantages. Now, here's one where, and let's go to presets. Let's come to one of my John's version 2. Is another one I made for situations like this image. You'll notice if I go to details, if I go to vivid, it's way overdone, right? So as good as Perfectly Clear is, and it really is, there are situations where it overdoes it, thus we have those sliders. But I've done enough work with the software, I realize I have different startups that I want. And version 2 works well. And what that's doing is coming in here and backing off the vibrancy to 0. I'm not turning it off completely, although that still makes a nice adjustment that's pretty close. But just that little bit of vibrancy looks good to me. And then you can come in here and change your exposure. And this one we might actually want to go to high. And a couple of clicks and we're done. So this is where, on this particular trip out to Valley of Fire, I was struggling again with these particular images to make them look the way I remembered them looking and wanted them to look with the raw converter. I was getting good images, but not what I wanted. They weren't didn't have that nice crisp pop that you can get out of Perfectly Clear. And just that fast, I was able to do the images that I fell in love with there, the detail abstracts, and go and do a batch again because I had a lot of them. I didn't really know what I had because they looked so flat. I was able to go in and do the batch I just showed you previously. I'll cancel on this one. So let's go to a couple of people. So let's look here, and I'm going to hit the D key to go to the develop module. Come on. And on this one, I have done some adjustments. I've actually used some clarity and some shadows, and I've set a white point, I've set a stronger black point, right? And so I've used the engine in Lightroom to do what I think would be good. So in this case, let's see how or what might happen if we go ahead and throw this into Photoshop and see if maybe Perfectly Clear might be able to do something even more than what we've done. of this gentleman. He's a famous gentleman down in Cuba that's been photographed by pretty much anybody that goes there. Really nice guy. Been on the cover of National Geographic, Traveler magazine. Okay, so we're going to add another thought here, another concept to how we can use Perfectly Clear. And I do this all the time. I use it in the beginning of a workflow, as we've been talking about so far, and where I'm not making any adjustments to sliders except for white balance. In this case, though, I might have done the adjustments I wanted to do in Lightroom, and I'm perfectly happy with the photograph. But then what I will say is, you know, I just wonder, maybe I'll go into Filters, Athentech, and go to Perfectly Clear. Let's see what happens, though, if I throw Perfectly Clear at it. And that's usually the response I have. I'm like, oh, actually, you know what? You know, in around his eye, it was a little dark there. That opened that up. I've got more detail in the coat and the hat. And there's just a whole lot more pop to this image. And the skin tones look a lot nicer to me. And we can go to Beautify, which takes that down just a notch. And it's going to do smoothing and stuff to skin. I don't think this particular photograph really is what Beautify and Beautify Plus are really for. So to me, this details makes a difference. Again, recognize you can come here and you can turn depth off, and this one's having a little more of an impact with depth than some of the other images that we showed you were, right? We can come in here and play with vibrancy, and that brings back some of that depth to the coat should you want to, your choice. Fidelity is going to look at those, and obviously his coat had more purple in it. Notice it just went to purple, and that's correct, versus the blue that's coming through here. So hopefully you're understanding now, Perfectly Clear does offer value to overcoming those problems with the sensor. And in this case, we thought we had a photograph that looked pretty good, but Perfectly Clear is making it even better in the Photoshop module. Rather than spend time, I'm going to hit the cancel and move on here. So now let's see if we can't bring these young ladies in from Cuba who were at the Rum Rum restaurant we were at. And let's come, whoops, I'm sorry, I want to go back into Photoshop. So I haven't done much adjustments here. Yeah, we'll bring it in here. You can do it either way. We'll just do one more going into Photoshop rather than doing it right from Lightroom. The brooding skies continue, but the lightning seems to have subsided a little bit. Okay, so here's one, again, pretty much unedited as a raw file. You can bring it in here. And by the way, Perfectly Clear is going to work on a JPEG, going to work on a TIFF, it's going to work on a RAW file. It's working on all those. So in this case, we'll go ahead and open up Perfectly Clear again, and we can see some pretty major adjustments. So let's go to Beautify and see the difference. So details kind of brightens things up, maybe a little too bright, but notice what Beautify does, and specifically Beautify Plus. Notice the dark shadows under her eyes have been removed. Not as much here, but there is something going on, and I find it to be a philosophical issue. It has something called face slimming. I'm not a fan. I like people to look like they look. Well, that's easy. We can go into the adjust and we can turn off the face slimming so that we're back to her face being the way it should look. But now what it's doing, and I wish you could see it better, and again, I'm not a portrait guy, so you might want to watch one of the saved webinars if you are more into portrait work. I can assure you that what's happening with regard to the smoothing of the skin tones, the teeth whitening, all these things here, the blemish removal, shine removal, all those things, it's pretty amazing. I watched a webinar just so I could learn. But the teeth really do look nicer. The whites around the eyes look nicer. There's more sparkle in the eye. So just understand that this is a really strong application for Perfectly Clear. It's where a lot of top professionals are actually using this product, is where you're doing portraiture work, or whether it be school portraits or portrait work or headshots or whatever. You can really quickly go through and have the beautify preset, modify that preset to be what you want it to be with the adjustments that you want, and you can do a whole batch from a portrait job that way. So that's what I wanted to just cover real quickly there, so that you can see the before and the after. Not only is it bringing life to specifically her face, it's getting rid of shadows under eyes, which may or may not be natural. A lot of us have them, but sometimes when we photograph the way the direction of the light, it just really enhances them and makes them look a lot worse than they really are. This is helping to eliminate most of that. Let's hit cancel. Okay, just a couple of more things, and then we'll take a couple of questions that I may or may not be able to answer. I always have to have Abigail in a webinar, because if I don't, people get upset. My granddaughter is just wonderful. And okay, so here's a black and white photograph. It's a JPEG. Notice it's a JPEG here. Here's what I want to do. I want to quickly open this in Photoshop, because I think it looks pretty good. It's the Smoky Mountains in the spring, I think it was. It's a great running water, slow shutter. I think I've got a really solid looking black and white. Guess what I do? I go to filter, perfectly clear. Let's see how good it, whoops, that's going to be, remember the preset for before. Yeah, look at that. It's actually kind of flat looking, to be honest. It's probably a little bit overdone. I think I like the vivid. I would come in here and start to make some adjustments and see where I wanted to go. But the point being, and vibrant, there we go. So the vibrancy needed to come down just a little, because this area right here is getting too black for me. But it's a major difference as far as the pop and the detail and definition that starts to happen in this black and white image. Just one example, it's going to vary on every image as to what it's going to do. But the way I see perfectly clear is it's that tool that lets me see, do I have a little bit of kind of that hazy flat look left, even though I think I've done a good job of setting a black point and a white point, or will I get some advantage from running it through perfectly clear at the end of the process? Normally would not do it on a JPEG, folks. I would be doing this, I would be doing my work in whatever tool, Silver Effects or what Tonality Pro, whatever it is that I'm doing my adjustments or conversions rather to black and white. That would be saved as a TIFF or PSD, and then I would be in Photoshop at that point, and then I would be applying perfectly clear and seeing what effect that's having on the image at that point. And oft times I will like what I see and accept that. Or what I'll do is the last thing we'll talk about here is I will have an image like this where I do a whole bunch of work, even including split grad filters to try to work, and I just struggled on this particular picture to get where I wanted to. So in this case, it is still a raw file. I would go ahead and say, let's open it up here in Photoshop and see what we get. And this would be the last concept I want to leave you, and then we'll take a few questions and let you go about your evening here. Okay. What I'm going to do this time is I'm going to create a background layer. There's no rule, there's no law, there's nothing that says you have to use perfectly clear on the entire photograph. So if you understand how to use layers and layer masks, then use perfectly clear where you want to use it, just like any other piece of software. So I'm going to hit Command or Control J, make a background layer so that I can now go ahead and apply perfectly clear. And let's see what it does to this image that I struggled with in Photoshop. Not bad. It gives me that contrast that I was just struggling to get. Let's kind of go through the presets and see what we get various looks here. Let's go to my presets that I have. John's start version, that's going to brighten things up a little bit, but it blows out the sky too much. John's sharp version, okay, I'm not sure how I quite feel about that, so let's see if we can't brighten this up a little bit. I'm looking at the foreground. I don't like what happens to the sky, and this is exactly what happened on this image. I was struggling a little bit to get it to be what I wanted, and so what I started to do is be satisfied with what was happening in the foreground and stop worrying about the sky. So I like the foreground now. We'll hit OK. And now what I can do is in this layer, I can come here to my layer mask tool. If you don't understand layers and masks, I have a whole little 10-minute video clip on my website that'll explain how to use them. But I put this here, and now I can hit my gradient tool, and now I can, whoops, I went the wrong way, sorry, pull down here, and now I can apply. Just remember the way a layer mask works is white reveals, black conceals. So I've simply done a quick gradient so that now the foreground of that image, let me show you before and after, has the perfectly clear applied to it that finally gave me what I was looking for. And then if you wanted to do the opposite and then do another layer, another Alt-J, and do the sky and see if you could affect that. I think the sky looks okay at this point. Then you could do that. So whether this is, again, the right image and whether this looks great or finished is irrelevant, right? Don't judge the photograph. Understand the concept and the tool that you could use here, and understand that you can use layers and layer masks inside of Photoshop and use perfectly clear there as well to adjust a portion of an image should you want to, or get your brush tool and brush out an area. Let's say over here it got too dark in this bottom ridge of the mountains here. You could paint there and just affect or affect the whole picture and just paint out or conceal that adjustment in that area. So I don't know if Matt or Riley are sitting there. I don't see in my screener, I don't see questions. I'll ask these guys if there's any questions that they've seen coming in or not. If not, those are the things that I wanted to cover tonight. And remember, if you don't have perfectly clear at this point, you can use the code Barclay, B-A-R-C-L-A-Y, when checking out and get a 10% discount on the software. And of course, if you don't know my work, and you can go to barclayphoto.com or johnbarclayphotography.com, either one works. We'd love to have you sign up for a newsletter or check a blog or those types of things. So anyways, Riley or Matt, are you there? They might be waiting for 9 o'clock here to do that. I'm not hearing them. Well, maybe with that, and I should be able to see messages here. I'm not seeing any messages. With that, folks, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you for stopping by. Hopefully there's some value in the webinar tonight. Tell your friends about Perfectly Clear, and hope to see you on the next webinar. Have a good night.